What happened to all them towers?
Slow train coming.
Huh?
Reform, Lamar. Reform.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com.
Hey, this is Toby. You're listening to Caught on the Wire, Season 10, Episode 3. Okay,
Season 10?
Let me just rewind a second. Season 3, Episode 10, Reformation, or Reformation, I don't know how you like to pronounce it, but...
You got me very excited for a second there, Toby. I thought there was some kind of entire ream of The Wire that
there is
I'd not heard of.
A few hidden seasons, you know, just off the HBO tracks.
5, to be precise.
Yeah.
Double the original length. Anyway.
Oh dear, I let it slip. Yeah. Alright, so Season 3, Episode 10. Just got my episodes and seasons mixed up there. But we are really pushing through. I'm with, as you heard there, my co-host Alex. How are you doing today, sir?
Yeah, very good. Although we've done a podcast since I moved, so I guess this one feels a little bit more like we're set in. So
Yeah, it's only been a few days, isn't it?
Back in, had our breaks. We've had our breaks in the middle. We're going to sort it out. We're also doing a slightly leaner, fitter, slimmer version of the podcast, trying to keep things, because the last episode was really, really long, and we don't want to take the piss. So
not at all. No, I mean it's
one thing for us to sit here and chat, but it's quite another when we're considering that people, might want to sit down and listen to this. And I think when you start making it 2.5 times longer than the episode itself, it's taking the mickey a bit.
Yeah, I mean, you could have watched nearly a quarter of Season 3 in the time it took to listen to that episode. So, to put it into perspective. So I think, it's definitely right. And we just, we need to keep it nice and lean. And as nice as it is to settle into things with a nice little chat and catch up, I'm sure we can get rid of that and keep things a little bit more efficient. So, with that said, should we bring on our emails, our listeners section?
Let's trot over to Listener's Corner.
Yeah, Listener's Corner, sorry. And we've had a couple of people write in. We heard from Ben, who, again, there's been a bit of a recurring discussion about D'Angelo, which is quite amazing, really, considering he died more than a season ago. But we're talking all about how his arc is continuing. And Ben has a point to make about D'Angelo coming up indirectly in Season 4, when Delonda and Namond go to see Dee's mum, Brianna, and I think, Ben says, I think she tells them that she doesn't care about Avon, doesn't she? So, I did not remember this myself, but that would be a very good point. And obviously I don't think Dee would have been mentioned explicitly, so it would have been a very indirect kind of line towards Dee. But if that's certainly the case, we'll be looking out for that next season. And it's nice that Dee really does resonate down through the season, even though he does check out pretty early. So it's definitely a good observation there from Ben, and we'll be looking out for it.
Yeah, it's a good little pointer, and as we said, I think we said last week, the whole of D'Angelo's arc is so important to how the rest of it continues, especially with the Barksdales as a whole and their fall that happens largely in this season. It's so embedded into that, so it's really difficult to say exactly where it stops just because the character is gone or because characters have stopped talking about them. The effects linger, and that's obviously one of the Wire's strengths in its storytelling, is the long-term implications of what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. And finally this week, recently we heard from someone else. We've had a few requests recently asking about where the rest of the season is. And just in case you are tuning in for the first time and you saw us on the iTunes list or whatever, or the podcast list, we unfortunately don't have seasons 1 and 2, but you can find them on our website. Due to bandwidth restrictions, we can't put them up at the moment, maybe in the future. But yeah, you can download all of them there, put them on your device and listen to them, not on the podcast app unfortunately, but some other way. They are all there, so please bear that in mind if you do want to.
And the YouTube channel.
And of course, yeah.
Every episode is on YouTube too. So the whole thing is available. It's just the iTunes stream that has the current season. It's almost like a live output, if you will. But yeah, because we got more people listening in through the iTunes stream than we expected, and we don't really have the hosting to really allow that amount of bandwidth at once. So we started having trouble where people wouldn't be able to listen to the podcast at all. So we just decided to switch it up that way. We've mentioned this a couple of times before, but it's just for the benefit of anyone who isn't aware that everything is still available. It's just on the website, on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Get it that way.
Definitely, yeah. So best of both worlds, really. Everyone still gets to listen, but a few more hoops to jump through. Okay. All right. After a very brief 5 minutes, should we jump straight into your recap, Alex?
Yeah, let's take a look. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 major sections, but they're all sort of middle-sized. There's nothing particularly epic. There's a lot of jumping around in this episode. We haven't even said the title of the episode yet, Reformation.
Reformation, yeah.
And yeah, it's a quite busy episode. We're really building up towards something. It feels like there's some serious stuff coming, and there definitely is. What with we can expect the Pelikanos episode next. You know what that means for The Wire always.
Yeah. I like the fact that Alan Sepinwall uses Pelikanos as a verb.
Oh, really?
Getting Pelikanos is the same thing as watching a penultimate episode of a Wire season.
So yeah, that's you can really feel that coming. So let's jump right in, and we'll start with the Stanfield organisation. So young Stanfield dealers Justin and Jamal leave a convenience store and hear gunfire nearby. They rush away from the store and come across the body of LaTroy, a Stanfield lieutenant. Their colleagues Snoop and Tote pull up in a truck, and Snoop orders them to get in for their own safety. Meanwhile, Marlowe remains safely protected by numerous bodyguards. And later on, Marlowe and Chris set up a nighttime ambush for Devon, Avon's bait. When she emerges from her home, Marlowe kills her, and Partlow assures him that the murder was necessary. This is all the direct Stanfield stuff in this episode. Starting up with that little opening where they come across LaTroy, and sort of Snoop pulls up and has quite a serious bit of screen time of what we've seen from Snoop thus far. She's said very little. It becomes very important as a character, and we see so much of her later on in season 4 and 5. Like it's kind of weird that she only gets these little look-ins every now and again, but it sets how serious the war is. That it is almost like a battleground. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, it's nice to see Snoop piping up a little bit. Justin as well. I think this episode is another Stanfield member who finally has a bit to do because he becomes quite prominent too. Yeah. It's an odd. This is part of the opening sequence, which is an odd opening sequence. It's very sort of hodgepodge of different things going on.
It is unusual, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to cover that all here, or are we going to go bit by bit, because it covers quite a few different of the institutions, doesn't it? But
yeah, I've broken them up into separate bits because, like you say, it is a bit all over the place. I don't think you can really talk about it as a whole opener.
Yeah, it's weird.
It kind of covers the opening of what's happening with the plot, I suppose, but it's not like a lot of openers which make a particular statement, or it's generally speaking, I guess it's just pooling all of these quite serious points together, and especially when we get to the Brother Mouzone stuff, that's your kind of point of reform. But generally speaking, it's as much of a catch up as any other scene, really.
Yeah.
So hard to talk about as a whole.
It felt like it could have been one of those classic opening montages, but perhaps The Wire by this point didn't want to break its own rules anymore. It had done enough experimenting, and we just sort of had this weird hodgepodge of different scenes. But I think ultimately what it does do is it suggests that a fair bit of time has passed. There's always that inevitable point in the season where it wants to really accelerate things and make it clear that time is going on and that consequences are coming to a head. It certainly does that well, and it really suggests that a climate of violence and gang warfare has returned properly to the streets following this Barksdale-Stanfield war that has now become ingrained in the streets itself, rather than just being this kind of looming threat. So I think it does that certainly very well, skipping between both the homicide department as they explore it and obviously Mouzone as well, but we'll get to that a bit later. And then we have the Devon scene, which
is incredibly brutal, and it's Obviously, just another show of Marlowe being totally unforgiving. He's not going to take a bait like that, it seems. Different, or new breed, I suppose I should say. And that's part of the whole reform theme, I suppose, is that these old tricks are no longer relevant anymore in the new street. And it's Chris once more backing up his boss, making him aware that these killings are necessary. So it's not just all Marlowe. He's kind of got a ring of people around him sharing these ideas. It's not like in the Barksdale organisation where it feels like there's a lot of characters who share slightly different ideals, and not just Avon and Stringer, but there's a real completeness to what's going on with the Marlowe's crew.
Yeah, it's concerning to hear that Chris Partlow is reassuring him that it needed doing. Like, that's, considering, you know, what we know about Devon and how harmless she really is, it's pretty grim to hear. And I guess Partlow would really need to hold Marlowe as a bit of a deity to really actually have that view. I mean, he might just be having that view because he is Marlowe's henchman, but it really feels like he believes it, and that Marlowe should never be inconvenienced by anyone. Anyone who does get inconvenience him should die for it. That's certainly the first time we're exposed to that behaviour, because it's a very common theme with Marlowe that anyone that inconveniences him slightly, whether it be a newsagent watchman who watches him steal a lollipop, if he speaks up about it, he's got to go. And this is the first time we see that with Devon. So, yeah.
Yeah, start of an ongoing thing with Marlowe, certainly.
Definitely, yeah. And it's interesting that he shot him personally, because normally it's such I'll delegate that to Chris or Snoop, but it really was a bit more of a personal thing for him here.
Well, he's never built up as much of a stranger to firearms.
No, and it's particularly strange and slightly disturbing when he shoots her right through the breasts and then straight down the gullet as well. Like, that's
the smoking mouth.
Yeah,
like it's quite horrific.
It's a really kind of quite visually moving way of doing it, like particularly the way they have the camera set up like right under her face. It's wow, very, very.
He really leans in and makes it very, very personal. So what makes him seem like he is cold. It is strange that he is cold-blooded, and he does have this streak about him, and how ruthless he is, and all of that obvious stuff. But at the same time, something felt weirdly personal about this one, just the way that he leans in and goes straight for the mouth, like. She was already going to be dead.
Yeah,
that wasn't entirely necessary. It felt like some kind of flourish, which makes it that little bit more sinister, if in case it weren't enough already.
Yeah, and it's odd. It's a very unusual way for Marlowe to kill people, because one thing that made Marlowe more interesting was his dedication to killing people swiftly and pain-free. So it'd always be a silenced pistol to the back of the head. When he was making a thing of killing Prop Joe, it would be, close your eyes, you get him one to the back of the head, it won't hurt none. It was very, very clinical and to the point, and it got what it needed doing, but, there was never any time spent torturing people, apart from when Butchie got involved. That was the one exception, but there was a different reason for that. And this is perhaps the one instance where that's not the case.
So a sort of earlier, rougher Marlowe, perhaps?
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, he's got rid of his headbands now. I remember the old Season 3 days, he was wearing those strange headbands which weren't very Marlowe, and now he's gradually learning new Marlowe things about himself as he comes into the real Marlowe. Yeah. Yeah.
Should we move on to the next big section then?
Yeah, sure.
So, on the other side, let's take a look at the Barksdales. So we have Detective Holly attending a crime scene in the Western District, which is another drug murder. He suggests that the Barksdales are the most likely suspects because the victim is one of Stanfield's people. Fruit is nearby to see the body of his colleague. Later at a safe house, Slim Charles reports in to Avon, signalling that 2 of Stanfield's people have been killed. The drug murder prompts another police crackdown on dealers citywide, affecting dealers from Prop Joe's co-op, including Fatface Rick and Philboy. They complain to Prop Joe about the ongoing war affecting their business. So this is the sort of miscellaneous Barksdale stuff, what relates to them, but not quite so directly. We see the results of successful in a very, very small short term for the Barksdales, as they managed to bag a couple of Stanfield's people.
Yeah, they've clearly...
which Avon seems very satisfied with, even though in real terms, he's not really gained anything here.
No, he's just intensified the war. But there was this weird period of waiting, wasn't there, last episode? And they've obviously come to an end now, and they've decided to strike again. Much to Fruit's disappointment. He seems really cut up by this murder. It must be one of his real sort of close second-in-commands. And yeah, so this was actually the opening scene of the whole episode, where it's just kind of Vern and Holly looking at this crime scene. And I thought that was a nice little callback to the original opening of the show, where we kind of see this crime scene at night with the people sort of, the discovery of Snot Boogie. So
yeah, that was a very kind of classic Wire scene, isn't it? Sort of outside, it's dark, there's lights flashing, there's some kind of investigation going on, people milling about, taking photographs, and the sort of solo detective that we're focusing on doing their work, looking very pensive and hunched over a notepad. It's classic Wire. It makes for a good opening fodder, I suppose.
Definitely, yeah.
But yeah, it ties us in nicely with what's going on with the Barksdales, and a good way to present a successful hit without sort of having to show it, or without resorting to melodramatics. We're just presented with a scene, and then the victor's returning home. It's a nice way to present it.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we have that resulting in the police crackdown, where we see them going into houses and sort of beating more heads. And we get complaints to Prop Joe from Fat Face Rick and Phil Boy, talking about how it's affecting their business, because it's obviously going to be harder for them when police are interfering with them more than usual. Great Prop Joe line as well, where it's like you stir up a hornet's nest, you don't know who's going to get stung.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something funny about the way he says that. It just sort of feels like he's almost reciting this poetry book, but because it's Prop Joe, you just kind of take it for granted that he is that wise, and that's kind of him.
He's got a notebook of them somewhere.
Basically, yeah. He's some fantastic metaphors that these people come up with. There was a fantastic one from Butchie a bit later, actually, wasn't there? It was about your chances of going up against them are slimmer than a garter snake or something like that, which I thought was pretty fantastic. But yeah.
And Lester's heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Yes. Yeah, people.
So there's a few. I'm sure there's more as well.
I mean, Landsman has a great way with words, but it seems to be a bit of a theme across the characters here, that they just have a fantastic sort of literary exposure. So,
and we're presented with obviously it's Prop Joe giving a little bit of a lyrical twist on what he means, but he's obviously presenting that whole idea that, despite what Avon thinks, the war is not just between him and Marlowe. It's everyone is involved, everyone is affected, and that results in the ultimatum that they present to Stringer later on.
Yeah, and obviously that line as well resonates across the episode throughout all the different institutions, as consequences really come to a head here, and people get stung that really don't deserve to, and the rest of it. Particularly, Colvin is someone who comes to mind a lot, so it's nice how that kind of sets the tone for the episode.
Well, speaking of Stringer, at the end of that, let's move on to the next section. And we have Stringer meeting with Shamrock at the funeral home. He's annoyed that his bodyguards have been replaced, and he asks Shamrock about their drug business, learning that they are running out of product and that their money count is down for 3 straight weeks. Stringer then drives to a meeting with Prop Joe and the other disgruntled co-op members, and they tell Stringer that despite his contribution, the co-op has voted to shut the Barksdales out if the war continues with Marlowe. They have approached Vincent and found that Marlowe may be amenable to a truce if he can keep his territory. So yeah, Stringer is now, we kind of see him being shut out of certain elements of what's going on, not just with the co-op, but also inside his own organisation. He's had his bodyguards replaced for him. We have, later on we see Slim going to Avon and whispering something in his ear, and Avon doesn't even say what it is. Stringer feels like he's being pushed out of his own organisation as well as the co-op. And then later on we see what's going on with Clay Davis as well, his doubt there. So it's just getting from bad to worse for Stringer. He's being forced out of everything.
Yeah, definitely. This is a scene that really... Not a lot happens in the scene, but if you really think about what each stroke of the conversation means, it's really painting a horrible picture for Stringer. First of all, this, they cut straight to this scene from Omar finding out from Butchie where this funeral home is. That's one threat. And then all of Stringer's, as you say, people have been replaced by Slim Charles, who seems to have been promoted above him, which must be a little bit of a kick in the teeth. And, the Stanfield War brewing, Shamrock's news that the product is down paints a very bleak outlook for the Barksdales. particularly Stringer, who has just had Mouzone come back in town to add another cherry to his cake. So there's so many things mounting up here that just completely almost write Stringer off from this point onwards, really.
And I love the smoking theme with Stringer in this episode, which starts, I think, with this scene where we have, I think it's Fat-Faced Rick is sort of smoking a cigarette and he blows, or a cigar or something, and like blows the smoke across Stringer, and it goes across the screen as we see that final look on his face. And then later on we see that Stringer is actually smoking himself.
Yeah.
And then there's the scene with Omar where he's watching them outside the funeral home and he's smoking a cigarette after seeing Stringer, and then sort of stamps his foot on it. We kind of get this very pointed shot of him sort of squashing the cigarette. There's this theme of smoking with Stringer throughout the whole episode, which is sort of quite nicely done.
That is cool. And
just quite an arbitrary little thing. It's not really a plot point per se. It's just a little bit of signalling, a bit of continuity in a miscellaneous area.
Yeah, and I guess let's not forget Devon, who smokes in a bit of a different way, but certainly that to add to it as well. Yeah, very cool. And I guess that includes the bit when he goes to the back of that sort of convenience shop, doesn't he, where there's a big fat-faced Rick and Prop Joe are there waiting for him.
Yeah, they have their little meeting.
Yeah, that's right. And he's has his mandatory bodyguards have to go with him. Eventually convinces them to not come in the shop with him, but they're tempted to.
Again, another signal of his coming death, because the fact that he sort of goes it alone when he's there at the construction site.
Yeah.
If he had his bodyguards with him,
yeah, that's very true.
He would be
actually.
all right. He would be protected.
Yeah.
So we've been teased with all of the shut that doors. Obviously, him coming into how it turns out to be that he gets trapped. So it's nice that this is nodding to it as well. Like his disdain for the bodyguards. Well, it's just another reason for his downfall.
Very true. I mean, let's not forget that the main motivation for the bodyguards is so Avon can keep tabs on Stringer. But I mean, I do imagine that they would have protected Stringer had they been there with him at the construction site. So, although actually it was Avon's call, wasn't it, to kill him? So I doubt that they would have made much of an effort to help him out. But yeah, it certainly is, like, symbolically, it certainly does to say a lot about Stringer. He doesn't take him along. And yeah, I guess that he walks in through this tiny shop, and then the room behind is about 3 times the size of the shop by the looks of it. But thankfully his guards don't come in with him, so Avon can't really hear exactly what's going on with the co-op at the moment and the crises that they're in, as Prop Joe puts it. But we see that the war has benefited the co-op so far as Marlowe is now willing to entertain going into it if he can keep his corners. I'm not really sure how genuine that is, knowing Marlowe, but it is something. It's something of a development towards it. But it's really made things worse for them in every other way. And we hear, Stringer is about to get out the thing that he helped to create, which is a horrible position for him to be in. So yeah, and of course this scene provides us with our epigraph.
That's true, yeah.
So, the crisis of leadership, nothing too intense there, quite a straightforward one. And he's told to cool off his doog, as the Baltimoreans say it.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about the epigraph later, for certain.
Yeah. So yeah, it's... yeah, I mean, overall, I feel really bad for Stringer in this scene. It's a big loss for him, the co-op, and you sense that the co-op was a good move for him. It's something that was going to enhance him as a person. Unlike getting in bed with Clay Davis, where it's harder to sympathise because you know that he's made some silly mistakes to get into that position in the first place. But this one is a real loss, and I think Stringer feels that all the more as well. Yeah.
Yeah, his hands are very tied, very much tied here.
Yeah.
He's obviously quite desperate to keep hold of all of these things, not have Avon ruin him, which is why he makes that decision later on to cool the Western District. So, a real conflict there for Stringer.
Yeah, you sense from this point onwards he's kind of made the decision to call the Western. It's just a case of plucking up the courage, really, and making sure it's the right thing to do. So, yeah.
So let's move on to the next bit. So Avon continues to plan his warfare against Marlowe from their base of operations. Stringer interrupts to deliver Prop Joe's news about the potential truce. But Avon seems reluctant, so Stringer warns him that the co-op plans to shut them out. Stringer accuses Avon of getting high on the power of leading the war and asks Avon to consider if they are in the game for their reputation or for the power it gives them. Avon informs Stringer that the news Slim delivered was that Marlowe has murdered Devon and reinstates his intention to continue the war. Stringer then returns to the print shop and slowly comes to a difficult decision. He phones the Western District Police. Later, he finds that property development grants have been awarded, but not to his company.
Oh dear, Stringer. And things keep on getting worse.
Exactly, yeah.
Not
This Barksdale organisation sort of part is very much focused around just things getting worse for Stringer on the whole.
Yeah, and it's nothing he does wrong this episode. It's just delayed reactions from past bad decisions, which makes it all the more painful, probably at this point.
Still no convincing Avon, of course.
No, I mean, it almost feels like he's beginning to mock Stringer with the whole grenade demonstration thing. Like, it was like,
yeah,
kill Ranger like 50 meters. It's just kind of like, you think I'm a soldier? Yeah, I'm a soldier. So it's the address disparity really kind of emphasizes that almost parodical way of doing it. Like, it's the ultimate business kind of straight to business suit with this really kind of military kind of streetwear.
What is it Colvin says? If you call this shit a war, it won't be long before everyone starts acting like warriors.
Yep, that's very true. Yeah, there's a nice link there, actually, definitely.
So yeah, Avon definitely going for that, and I think you're right. It is getting to the point where it feels more like a barracks than a sort of place where they're organising the selling of drugs. Like,
yeah,
all of this weaponry lying around and people returning from missions and everything. You know, it's a real sort of it's a real barracks kind of feel going on. So.
And as far as the military stuff goes, it's Slim Charles that has the, you know, he's the one who's privy to the decision making. It's Stringer's shut out of this aspect of the business, much to his annoyance. It's, yeah, as we saw with that whispering, as you mentioned earlier.
Well, whereas once we had a number one and a number two, now we have kind of both of them trying to be number one in different areas and. You know, not agreeing, not coming together, not. We hear all of that talk from Stringer here about, you know, they're brothers and they've been on this together and they got the whole world at their feet and everything. But I think, you know, Stringer doesn't really believe any of that anymore. It's just trying to placate Avon. It's just there as a whole game in itself. I mean, he's talking about games outside the game. I mean, that's the one that they're playing together. They're not dealing in the actual sort of street stuff anymore. This isn't about Marlowe, it's not about Omar, it's not about the problems that the organisation is facing. It's become really very, very personal between the two of them about who's in charge and the egos. And yeah, it's a big moment here and a big decision that Stringer makes. Yeah,
that's a very good point, actually. It's a bit like when you set up a detail and it's not about the case, it's about McNulty. It's a little bit like that. It's just kind of become about it's
morphed into that.
It's the egos rather than the actual destination. Yeah,
no shortage of McNulty ego in this episode.
No, definitely.
The more on that bit is it gets even worse when he finds out about the development grants. You know, they've been awarded to 9 developers or something, but not him.
Nope. Yeah.
And he's,
alarm bells ringing.
You know, $250,000 going towards Clay Davis, and suddenly he doesn't seem quite so helpful after all. So.
Yeah, definitely. And so yeah, he sends off those papers, doesn't he? Yep, it's definitely kind of hit the wall for him with that, as far as Clay Davis goes. Any other points you make about these scenes? I think there was a couple. Stringer sort of looks through Avon and projects his own goals onto him, which is, I think, a little bit what McNulty was getting at with the D'Agostino angle that he was kind of ranting on about a little bit later in the episode. So I thought that was a sort of nice link that they drew on there. And also, of course, Avon mentions later on that, you know, the actual secret was that Devon was killed very recently, and that's just another way of saying, you know, like Slim Charles does, once you in it, you in it. Someone's hit us, we're going to have to hit them back, and there's nothing we can do about it. Like, the revenge is the most important aspect.
Well, they feel like Stringer would almost be a bit tempted to say, well, no, we don't have to retaliate, you know. But it's he knows at this point it's going to fall on deaf ears. That's not the agenda that's going on.
Well, I mean, he said that in as many words really to him. He said, you know, this game's beyond the game, and Avon doesn't even seem to listen. Like, all he's thinking about is the casualty of Devon and how they're going to get back at Marlowe. Like, there's just no contemplation. They're just existing on different planes, really, at this point. They can't leave Devon's death unpunished. Yeah.
So that's the Barksdale organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess there's one final bit when we kind of watch Stringer as he contemplates phoning the Western, and
that's where he's actually making his decision. Yeah,
the camera's outside the office, looking in, like sort of framing Stringer in that window, which is nice, kind of trapping him into that situation.
Yeah, it's a nice shot. It's quite a common sort of theme in The Wire. I think we said before about frames within frames and people framed in doors and windows and all sorts of stuff. So mirrors and the like. So yeah, it's a good use of it here, like you say, confining him to that small space, his sort of thinking space.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's also, I think you're right. There's also, there's a sense that he's not making the decision there and then. He's made up his mind. He's just, like you say, coming up with the courage. He's just having a moment to steel himself, and then he does it. Yep,
definitely. And he is now a man who is above the law. He wasn't in seasons 1 particularly, and some of season 2, but he's now in the position where he can make these phone calls. He believes himself to be a legitimate businessman at this point, and he can now call up the cops and the criminals, sort of thing. And that's the role he's now taking. So
yeah, it's bold.
Yeah,
very bold.
But as Freeman says, that there's no way we can really. Well, they have caught him on being involved with the drugs, but for most of the time, there's no way they can tie a can to his tail, and he's making this, as you say, very bold move.
So should we move on to the Western District itself?
Yep.
This is... Actually, no, it's not. I was going to say it's possibly our larger section, but it's not. We start with Colvin, meeting with Sergeant Carver, thanking him for his loyalty. Tells Carver that he thinks he's a good man and good supervisor, but that he's not performing as an investigator, and berates him for his lack of confidential informants, whilst drawing a distinction between the drug war and real policing. Lieutenant Mello interrupts to tell Colvin that reporters have learned of his free zones. Meanwhile, Herc and Officer Lloyd Garrick are taking the reporter on a tour of the free zones and revealing the details of Colvin's plan. Colvin and Mello arrive promptly to talk to the reporter, named Boniski, and Colvin spins the reporter a story about the free zones being part of an enforcement strategy. The reporter agrees to hold the story for a week, and Colvin discusses his options with Mello and his community relations sergeant, deciding to admit his involvement and face the consequences.
Oh, bunny. It's all going wrong for you as well, isn't it?
Yep, it's an interesting opening bit with Colvin where we see a nice bit of bonding, as it were, between him and Carver, giving him a bit of a schooling, as it were, on what he considers to be real policing, and there's a sort of old school wisdom being imparted here that definitely Carver registers it, I think. Obviously taken note here, but it also feels like the scene is a little bit of a mouthpiece for the views of the show, or the views of the writers of the show. And we all know that The Wire has its times when it likes to be quite, likes to be very out and proud about how it feels on certain situations and using certain characters to express those views. It's not. I don't think it's a show that's entirely without bias. I'm not saying that it's not right in places, but it's definitely not a show without bias. And this is one of those moments where maybe it strays a little closely along the line of taste. It does go on for quite a bit, and talking about these failures of the drug wars, and these are all messages that have been portrayed already. I feel like this is kind of season 1 stuff that we're looking at here. It's just being used in the context of Amsterdam, which is all very well and good. And as much as I love Colvin as a character, it's maybe stepping over the line a bit here. It does just become a bit of a preach.
Yeah. Particularly as he was the paper bag speech as well was another big moment for him in this. I know that there are characters that have gotten away with lots of big speeches. I know Sobotka had plenty. Colvin's do feel a bit more low-key and wisdom-centric and, very, very, I guess, preachy, definitely. I guess we've been waiting for this moment for a long while with Carver. I'm quite a big fan of the scene, certainly, but I am sympathetic to what you're saying there about it being a little bit too on the nose. Yeah, but it's quite sad, really, because he's talking about such an outdated method of policing and knowing the community and using it to your advantage, which isn't something that happens nowadays. And the sadness is that you sense he's only springing it on Carver because he knows he's the only member of that squad who's kind of matured enough to be susceptible to the lecturing and the training, someone who won't defy the words and condemn them as soon as he starts chatting to his buddies, sort of thing. And, you know, he certainly chose the right man. Carver does respond to this very well, and it's almost instantly that he becomes a different person after this. He begins, you know, putting all his time into the people and into the kids and playing the games and trying to, you know, really keep the peace. So
just another Reformation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it feeds right in there, and it works as far as that goes. Certainly, it's a good moment for Carver, and perhaps a more hammy one for Colvin. But I did like that, and Colvin should be pleased with himself because Colvin really wanted to make a difference. That's what he was there for in this season, and Amsterdam may never have actually amounted to much, particularly as we're going to see here later on. But he made a complete difference here with Carver in one fell swoop, because he takes this lesson to heart and instantly improves his game, and takes noble policing with him to his eventual lieutenant's post from this point on. So if he's changed, you know, one person for the better, he's certainly done it here. Not to take away from Daniels, who has also helped to shape Carver, but I feel like this was the final push that he needed. So,
yeah, it's the making of a real officer here, I think. And you're right. Even if Colvin only helps the one person, it's better than nothing.
Yep.
Even though we have also been demonstrated that it's been causing harm as well. So, yeah, very difficult to say. But yeah, it's all going to come crashing down for Colvin as well. We see a little bit more of that next. Should we move on to the Comstat meeting?
Yeah, sure. Oh, have we discussed the free zones and stuff?
Oh yes, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
There's the bit with the reporter, reporter Beniski, who is not featured in season 5, which is quite unusual for the Wire to kind of bring in reporters that aren't featured again.
Yeah,
usually they're bringing them in and out and saving them for season 5, but Beniski don't see again. So
I guess it's 4 years later in terms of the show's chronology, and perhaps it would feel a bit too neat if everyone sort of wrapped up into a little bundle sort of thing. But yeah, I guess he moved on or had a buyout or something before everyone else started the trend. But yeah,
it's Herc sort of demonstrating a bit more outrage. Colvin spins a good story and is able to be quite diplomatic about the whole thing. He's able to buy them a bit of time so that he can at least tell superiors and whatnot and not have it come as a surprise to them.
Yeah. I think it's pretty cool because it's the only time we get to see the other free zones in action. Because I think Herc takes him to the second one and then the third one, and we've focused so much on the Vincent Street one that we have no sense of what the other ones are like, and they certainly look a bit quieter. Just not quite as intense as the other one that goes down. So I think flimsy but ultimately convincing as he tells the reporter that they're building cases from the free zones. Hard to see how that would be working, but I guess you have to take it at face value. And he gets given a week by the reporter. It seems pretty crazy considering he's telling a senior policeman about it all, but equally it's a big section of the city that's seeing a lot of change without anyone writing about it, so you can understand that they wouldn't want to lose the story of the year to another paper. So I think it's kind of a fair deal in the end to give them a week just to sort it out from their point of view anyway.
Yeah. And there's a certain, responsibility for the papers to, he's obviously given the tale as if it might do some harm to the police work that they're doing, so he knows that he still has a responsibility not to restrict the work of the police.
Yeah, definitely. So it's finding a middle ground between being, the voice of the people or whatever, and actually pretending to at least protect police work.
So, at the next Comstat meeting, Colvin gives a presentation showing his cleaned-up streets where drug trafficking was once uncontrollable. Major Reed is slow to understand how Colvin achieved this, but Rawls immediately realises that Colvin has essentially legalised the drugs in specific areas. Burrell, enraged, immediately ends the Comstat meeting, ordering Colvin into his office with Rawls and Major Reed. And in the office, Colvin tells Burrell that he acted alone and is willing to take the fall for the scheme. But he insists he is equally willing to lie about who sanctioned his ideas if any of his subordinates are punished for his actions. Colvin also presents a collection of commendations and letters from members of the public, but Burrell tells him that it's not enough to protect them, and orders Colvin to take his vacation time so as to avoid drawing attention to the scandal. On the way out the door, Colvin makes them aware of the Baltimore Sun reporter and how he is delaying the story for a week at most.
Yeah.
So this is not good news for the higher ups, because finally we get to the one thing. I guess we've seen enough of it already, but in the ComStat meeting we get to the one thing that's even more important than the stats, and that's the reputation and job security of those in charge. Nothing must come between them and their sort of sparkly, clean personas. Rules doesn't seem quite as angry as Burrell. He seems almost to find it a bit funny, kind of how bold it is of Colvin to have done this and then to openly admit it. But Burrell is obviously enraged because he knows how fragile his position is. He knows that Royce is going to screw him over on this one, and he does. So
yeah,
he's rightly angry.
But it's quite cool, isn't it? Because Rules seems to get it and the others don't. Because I think Colvin's very clever with the way he describes what he's done. He never alludes, or he does allude to, but he never explains that he's legalized drugs. And in fact, Burrell and Reed seem actually quite, positive about it. Their faces certainly light up a little bit when they hear about his great enforcement strategy. And then all of a sudden, Rule says, "Hang on a minute, think about it. He's just legalized drugs," and all of a sudden, it turns into this absolute frenzy of cover-ups and stresses beyond belief. So it certainly hints at Rules being the smarter of the bunch, and also the most, as you were saying, he's not so upset, he's just a bit more amused at how ridiculous it is.
Yeah, it's kind of shows how perhaps how far they are from actual strategizing in terms of police work.
Yeah.
Whereas Rawls still does have his head in it. So
definitely, yeah. So it's I guess ultimately Colvin overestimating the bosses, and he says that he can, he's going to explain himself rather than just sort of leave it going, and it's going to go back to the same as before Amsterdam, whether you explain yourself or not. That's the thing, I guess. From all he's learned from ComStat, he perhaps should have kept it quiet, but then again, we've already discussed the point about him leaving it for the next commander to grab the ship for. So overall, it's probably a good move. I guess he thought if he gave them the chance to hear the pros and cons, maybe they'll consider it, but really, he should have known the political realities would never allow that. So
it's also, as shown here, Colvin, never honourable, is trying to protect those underneath him. Is trying to protect his men, as he says. He doesn't want any of the damage to fall on them. He's very upfront about how much it's his idea. He's the one pushing it forward, and he's going to do the whole falling on his sword if necessary.
Yeah,
he obviously doesn't care at this point. So
an incredibly endearing aspect of him, of course. There are a number of old school police who are very, very into that whole loyalty side of things, and you never give up your people.
Yeah.
That certainly works in his favour. And the only time he was willing to be dishonest is if his people were on the line, sort of thing. They were going to be punished. Yeah.
So that's about that. We end up with Colvin sort of taking his vacation time, and he disappears off and is sort of out of the policing for the remainder.
Yeah, for the remainder of the show, really.
That's kind of the end of it for him in terms of the policing. Seeing as he's on his way out anyway, he's just taking a sort of early vacation.
Yeah.
And obviously tells them about the Sun reporter and just leaves them sort of in a bit of stunned silence, I would have thought.
That's true. I thought it would be best to leave the final weapon, the one where he walks out the door, the best one to leave it would be the letters. Because that was kind of a bonus weapon at the end that not even the audience knew about. They really saved that one so that we could be surprised as well. And perhaps be like, oh, this is it. That they're now going to see that, policing is for the community and the community like what's going on. Why should this be a problem? And it's a little bit more complicated than that. But yeah, it really is a sad truth that these letters don't really change anything as far as Colvin's ramifications go. But yeah.
And Burrell does take them to Royce later on, so he must think something of them.
Exactly, yeah. He just didn't want to let Colvin have any chance of not facing consequences for it and showing any weakness, I guess.
Yeah. I do have a very small bit at the end for the Western District, if you want to move on to this last little bit.
Yep.
Kind of crosses our major case unit with the Western District, where McNulty visits Colvin and tells him that a CI has revealed the location of Avon Barksdale's waterfront condo. He comments that the CI also revealed that Barksdale's name was on the deed. Colvin resists McNulty's attempt to find out more information about his CI. So we just have McNulty finding out a little bit of information here. It's just the short one scene. Colvin doesn't say any more about where he's getting his information from. That's about it, really.
Oh yeah, that was McNulty, wasn't it, going in?
A little bit more of a bushy top, endearing action, but that's about it, really.
No, yeah, not too much to report. And I did have some notes on this. Yeah, all right, maybe we'll come back to that. But yeah.
So that's the Western District. We'll move on to the politics next. So Carcetti and D'Agostino chair a campaign strategy meeting with Carcetti's close friends. The major issue discussed is race. Carcetti's backers agree that they need African Americans in their campaign team and endorsements from black community leaders. D'Agostino outlines the importance of keeping Tony Gray in the race in order to split the black vote. Carcetti is reluctant to begin making fundraising calls, but D'Agostino tells him they desperately need the funds, with at least $1 million required for television advertising. Carcetti later discusses his guilty feelings about betraying Gray while in bed with his wife Jen. She suggests that he tell Gray that he also plans to run, but Carcetti worries that this may drive him out of the race, and he knows that his campaign is dependent on him remaining a candidate.
So Damon's dad isn't back, is he? Because I know that these people were there during that scene.
Yeah, it's Pete Sinopoli, I believe. That's Damon was telling us his dad played, and I'm pretty sure he's in this scene.
Yeah.
I think he's credited.
Okay. All right. So he was back.
Or maybe not. Maybe he's credited as a character.
Because I think there was one guy of that bunch that wasn't there, but the other ones returned. So maybe he was the missing link. We don't know. Might have to get Damon to confirm that for us. But I forgot that these guys crop up again as kind of Carcetti's main political confidants, I guess.
Yeah. So they're just having a little discussion about, again, it seems to be about if Carcetti really wants it, he really wants to have this control, this position of power, he's going to have to make certain sacrifices to get there, and one of them is definitely going to be his integrity, his relationship with his friends. You know, he's got to cut a few ties and sort of use people in order to get where he wants to go, and he has to, like D'Agostino says, you either live with it or you lose.
Yeah, and if you
it's
call
just
it
a sad reality of the particular game he wants to play.
Yeah, definitely. And if you call it politics, then it's fine. You don't have to worry about it. It's not on you, and that's such a classic Wire thing, isn't it? Like convincing someone else that a misdeed is not their responsibility. It's merely part.
It's not personal. It's politics.
It's part of the game, whether that be politics or street warfare. Definitely. Yeah, something that the Barksdales and other street level characters have to do all the time. So definitely. And of course, we see Carcetti's scenes are continually much shorter and punchier than anyone else's this season, particularly. They're just kind of whizzing right through his story. And it was still David Simon's intention at this point, actually, to do a mini-series that covered the politics angle before Season 4 started. And I assume that perhaps, well, it's me assuming here, that would have covered Carcetti's election campaign and perhaps his actual getting elected as well. And then Season 4 would have been him in office, gradually descending. But that didn't get through, unfortunately, so perhaps that's what was being set up by these scenes here.
Yeah, that would have been cool. I've always wanted to see more of the politics stuff. I thought it was always very well done, so shame we didn't get to see a bit more of that, but like you say, Carcetti, instead we have these very short scenes tying everything together.
Yeah, definitely. some ways I'm glad they just kept The Wire as a big kind of collective package, though, because it might have been a bit strange to have this one little mini season for the politics. But I'm not going to say no to more Wire content by any means. So we see that the story is gradually shifting into season 4 territory. Dialing for dollars is coming up. Black faces in prominent positions, splitting the black vote. All these big things that Tommy has to sort of balance up in season 4, and ensuring that Tony Gray stays a relatively viable candidate is the only way to do it. So that's going to be tricky as well. You got to make sure that you don't over kind of motivate Tony or encourage him, but you have to make sure that he's encouraged enough to stay at least a little bit behind you in the race. What do you make of the bedroom scene with Jen as well?
Yeah, we see Carcetti obviously deliberating over this, so we sympathise with him here about these tough decisions and the fact that if he really does want to be mayor, then, like I say, he's got to consider his friendships and what it is he's going to sacrifice. But it's good that we see him really brewing over it. He's not making any sudden decisions about this. And Jen, as always, very supportive and always sort of wanting him to be the best that he can be. And in that sense, you kind of forget about it at this stage, but I always think about how when Carcetti cheats on Jen and sort of sleeping with these strangers earlier on, and it's really quite hard to watch because you see how supportive a wife Jen is.
I didn't feel like this was the warmest of scenes, though. She does offer advice, but there's no words of sympathy, or there's no comment when he explains how he feels about having to betray his oldest friend. She just sort of turns over and turns the lights off and go to sleep, which I thought was a bit of a strange reaction. But I guess that's kind of who she is. She internalises a lot of perhaps her problems that she has with Carcetti. Assuming that she does have some, we don't know for sure, but she's always been a very not a non-character, but we feel like a lot of her struggles are really shoved under the carpet. So
I feel like there could have been a bit more about maybe a nod to the pressure on her, because I thought it could be there could have been a little bit about how it was affecting their relationship, and she's probably having to have these conversations all the time. Like it's hinted at when he's sort of wanting to watch those videos of him, how well he did in council today, and you sort of suddenly realise that he's at home with his family in that earlier episode with the food in the VCR.
Yeah.
So there could have been room for that, but I think this is just nodding to that idea that she probably hears these kind of conversations all the time and she's doing her best to kind of chime in and help him out, but in reality is probably getting quite frustrated with the fact that it's just always about what he's doing and what he wants. And maybe that's sort of an undercurrent to it. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. It's not the case at all.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great reading.
I think I'd like to think that there was an intention to make more out of it and that they just had to put nods to it instead.
Yeah.
So that's why, to an extent, you are right to an extent when you say that Jen is a bit of a non-character, because we don't explore her personality or her desires or her actions much at all. She's just very much there every now and again to pipe up, and that's about it, really.
Yeah. You get the sense that Tommy has enough stresses on his plate without having her voicing her concerns about him. So she keeps stum. But yeah.
So in that sense, I guess she is supportive.
Yeah.
So that's why it's kind of, she's there sticking it out and being quite loyal and having to deal with everything else, all the family life and everything, whilst he's out doing his thing. But sometimes the thing that he's out doing is sleeping with other women.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I get, it's tricky if you are running for office, like your life is all about you promoting yourself, and Tommy's clearly struggling to find the difference between focusing on promoting himself and actually spending time hearing about his family and other things. So I think it would be nice to hear more. Perhaps that's what was intended for the mini-series regarding Carcetti and the politics. But it does feel like they're certainly laying down a few indicators here that there is some sort of conflict that's just not being addressed by either of them, which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah, very slight amount of tension.
Yeah, definitely. And, She does suggest, though, before she pops off the lamp, that he waits a few years before running, which perhaps is her trying to convey her feelings about it in a very gentle way. Like, I don't really want you to become the mayor, or at least if you become the mayor, then great, you're not going to have much time for me, and if you don't win and become the mayor, then you're just going to be bitter and angry about it the whole time. So, yeah, I felt like that was perhaps a nice allusion to it.
Let's move on to our second politics part then. Burrell meets with Mayor Royce and his Chief of Staff, Colvin Parker, to tell them about Colvin's actions following Comstat. Parker suggests that Burrell will be fired and refuses to take his lack of knowledge about the situation as an excuse. Burrell tells Royce about the crime reduction and gives him the letters from supporters in Colvin's district, specifically those of citizens and voters who Royce is most concerned with for the upcoming election. The mayor is impressed with the drop in crime, but refuses Burrell's suggestion to break the story and claim it was planned as a trap for drug dealers. Royce ends the meeting with Burrell and contemplates how to use this information.
Yeah, so similar scene to Colvin getting fired is Burrell getting fired straight afterwards. It's a nice little domino effect.
Yeah.
I don't think he finds some way to crawl back in, doesn't he? Because he is there for actually until mid-season 5. He remains the commissioner. But yeah, these actions are flying right up the chain. It's a serious alarm bells ringing after Amsterdam, and but that as with I think Rules did a little bit, that there is a serious contemplation of the positives here. These people aren't stupid; they're just very politically minded, and they're very capable of understanding the positives that are the drop in crime, the actual community spirit that's returning. But eventually they seem to sort of snap out of it and don't go there. So just I'm going to have to think about my political stability here, and that's kind of what eventually sort of is the true victor in these battles.
Although, in a slightly cynical way, the positives, though they may see them as benefits to the community and the like, I would imagine Royce is most concerned with how it can be positive for his image as the mayor, having this sudden drop in crime after having this big speech about reform and the towers coming down. It's a sort of good opportunity for him to jump on this, but at the same time, he's smart enough to know not to draw too much attention to something that could blow up in his face. So I think, unfortunately, despite them, they're capable of understanding it. Like you say, they do seem to snap out of it and basically see where the personal gain can be found.
Yeah, definitely. And so both Burrell and Royce seem to contemplate this, but they ultimately stay true to their political means, and they both hang their subordinates on the line for it. And as much as an arsehole Burrell is, you really do have to feel pretty bad for him. The number of times the mayor has made bad stuff fall on him, particularly in this case where he really had no control whatsoever. It was just sprung on him that Colvin was doing some stuff in the Western, and you could always argue that he should have kept better tabs on his subordinates, but you're really trapped between a rock and a hard place when this is sprung on you. So just by virtue of his position, he has to take the fall for it.
We also note that we haven't seen a whole bunch of Royce in this season, and when we do see him, there's always it's all a lot of political strategizing and having sort of difficult conversations with people, but there's not a lot of going out and being the mayor and doing any of these visits or drives or fundraising or all of the other sort of political things that you might expect a mayor to be done. He just always seems to be in his office, and he's just there with Colvin Parker, and they're usually taking it out on someone from the police.
Yeah.
Or they're talking about how they can save themselves from various difficulties related to crime or other problems going on in the city. There's not a whole lot of mayoral stuff going on with him other than the strategizing within his own camp to keep himself the mayor.
Yeah, and the show makes it clear that Royce has been the mayor for a long time, and he's kind of perhaps got stuck in a bit of a rut. And as Odell Watkins says, he, as most mayors do, they come in with some level of idealism about what they can change, and it eventually descends into, protection of self, really, politically. And you sense that it's been going on for so many years with Royce that he can't really get out of that now. And as you say, it's just a bunch of conversations with them trying to insulate themselves politically and not really going anywhere. And that certainly is designed to corroborate with what Watkins says about Royce throughout this season, that they really need some fresh blood in the council.
Yeah, this strange arc of coming into the position and the euphoria of winning, and then all the hardships of the reality of what it's like to be the mayor, and they come to sort of hate the position to some extent, and then if they're there long enough, they actually end up never wanting to leave.
Yeah, it's this circle of viciousness by the sort of looks of it, and it's a nice kind of, it marries up quite well with Carcetti's arc through the series. It's kind of the continuation of where we see him in season 5, I guess, although he does end up being governor, so it's a slightly different story. But yeah. And I guess the other thing to mention was, it's interesting to see, I mean, Burrell hasn't really had too many major moments since season 1. I remember we kept mentioning in season 1, Burrell versus Daniels round whatever. So many of those moments where Burrell was just crapping on Daniels, throwing his subordinate under the bus for all their misdemeanors, all the stuff that kind of fell bad on the department. And here we go, finally the roles are reversed, and Royce is having the option to throw Burrell down there, so it's a nice little bit of catharsis for us in that instance anyway.
Yeah, that's true. He's getting his comeuppance.
Yep.
Alright, so let's move on to our largest section, which is the major case unit. And we're starting with McNulty complaining to Freeman that they are still not up on any wiretaps and probably missing drug conspiracy phone calls. Daniels and Perlman meet with Phelan, their judge, to discuss their difficulties with drug dealers discarding phones. Phelan continues to flirt with Perlman throughout the meeting. He asks for other options, and she says that her boss, Demper, is too focused on re-election, and the feds are unable to help. Phelan offers to sign wiretap affidavits at any time as long as they uncover phone numbers. Daniels and Perlman later discuss this meeting with McNulty, and he wants to rush the paperwork, but Daniels cautions him. McNulty also expresses his distaste for Phelan, but Daniels points out that McNulty believes that anyone who gets in the way is worthless, to which he concedes.
Yeah. So
the main part of that, I mean, we start with McNulty complaining, as he is often wont to do if they're not making lots of very progressive headway in the case, and that moves us on to Daniels and Perlman having their meeting with Phelan, who we see for the first time in quite a while.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen it since the Bird trial.
Since season... Yeah, it's got to be season 2.
Yeah, early season 2, so he makes a nice little appearance. Still the same old fella, still perving on Rhonda a little bit. But we see that...
Which she uses to her advantage.
Absolutely, yeah. You have to break the rules every so often, and it certainly works, as you say, massively to their advantage. And we get the sense here that Phelan really is kind of at the end of his rope with his career, and he's got no hopes of rerunning for any other positions, and it's a little bit like Colvin, really. He just kind of wants to have a little bit of fun on his way out, perhaps, and use his power for something a little bit different. And we see that he's here ready to authorise some fairly unorthodox policing up until now, particularly as we come towards those pre-tapped burners, which seems ridiculous, at least to the department at first, before Phelan gets his eyes on it.
It's also nice to see Daniels in quite a comfortable position. He's obviously got his unit going for him now, and it seems like things are going really well with him and Rhonda. Like he again sort of is making a bit of a joke, which is in of itself quite an unusual moment for Daniels. They sort of share a bit of a laugh about what's going on with Phelan. It just reminds me of the start of what was going on in season 2, where we see him down in the evidence locker. He's in a real low there, and all the problems that he has with Marla. But now it seems like you can appreciate, you can appreciate how things are going well for him this time around.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, his struggles are very much the first half of the series, aren't they? And from now on, things continue to get better for him as he's shot up the chain. He becomes, commissioner within a matter of 2 or 3 years from this point, thanks to Carcetti. So yeah, it seems that things do go well for him from this point onwards, which is nice. I guess we have Perlman mentioning Demper, who we haven't seen in ages either. He's her boss.
The state's attorney.
That's right, the state's attorney, who has always been portrayed hasn't got many scenes, but he's always portrayed as a little bit of a hack and a very politically focused guy. He loses the election to Bond later on next season, who is a much more prominent character, and gets to replace him and change the attorney way of doing things, which is cool.
Yeah. And then we have a nice scene back in the actual detail or major case unit office itself where Daniels quite rightly says that anyone who seems to stand in McNulty's way is an arsehole as far as he's concerned.
Yeah.
Which McNulty, to his credit, is actually, like we were talking about him having a bit more self-awareness. He definitely seems to have a bit more of it here when he concedes the point, realises that maybe he is taking it a bit too far. It's not to say he's not going to do it again, but that he at least realises it in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that he takes a little moment to think about it as well, and he goes, on balance, he's probably right. Yeah, point taken. So it is refreshing. And it's certainly not an apology, which would have been the best option, but it's consistent with his recent developments, as we say. And he's now being a bit more considerate of the points of view of those around him, rather than just going back on the whole defensive arguing line, which you sense he would have done a few episodes ago. So, yeah, it's good. He's building up towards his days of settling down in Season 4.
Yeah. Right, so our next section, Freeman matches Bodhi's voice to a prior recording when he makes a phone call to his grandmother. This information is used as probable cause for a wiretap. With the wire up and running on Bodhi, the unit soon has him talking in code about drugs to less disciplined colleagues who use names on the phone. Bodhi is heard ordering a resupply for a dealer known as Tweety Bird. Caroline Massey, who is back once more, tells McNulty that the code remains similar to their other investigations apart from one word, Amsterdam, guessing that it may have something to do with the stash house. McNulty departs to meet up with Greggs and observe Bodhi's meeting with Tweety Bird, and Daniels asks Pullman to leave the room and tells his detectives the latest news about Prez, having to ask them about the racial element as part of the internal investigation.
Yeah, so cool to hear from Bodhi's grandma again, I guess. A character who we did see in episode 4 of the show, I believe.
Yeah, very, very briefly, where Herc and Carver pay a little visit. And there's sort of that uncharacteristic moment where Herc is the considerate one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So it's a good little callback to her, very minor character. And they don't have their eyes on the street anymore. They had to use the old recordings from season 1 to make their new recordings credible. So there really is quite a crazy amount of hoops to jump through in terms of making sure that your evidence stands up in court. So
yeah, they gained a bit of ground before, but now it's flagging a little bit. Like you say, they have to use old information for new information. But they do succeed. They get their wire up and running on Bodhi.
Yep.
They get some information about that. They get what is clearly some code. He's talking about washing powder or laundry or something, which is apparently a bit of a giveaway.
Yeah.
And they do mention Amsterdam, which they say that they're not familiar with.
It's pretty crazy. It's so ironic they just haven't heard of it, isn't it? But I guess it makes sense. We see that McNulty and Kiemer have stayed true to keeping the free zones completely under wraps because they do know about it. They caught Bodhi driving towards one.
Yeah.
And considering how much time they spend scoping the streets these days, do they not go there at all? I was wondering about that. Is the show just not showing us that bit? But they really are doing a good job at keeping a blind eye to what's going on. So that certainly struck me.
But they're picking up on the use of the word, but clearly not aware of what it means yet.
No, definitely not. Yeah, but everyone's happy. There's a lot of smiles all around as the wire goes back on. Even if,
some successes.
Yep, even if Prez isn't unfortunately there to join in with them, but sorely missed.
Daniels has to clearly, he's obviously no fan of it himself, but he has to ask Massey and Freeman whether they thought there was any kind of racial element to him, or if they ever picked up any, discriminatory vibes from him. But it seems like a question that needn't really be asked, other than for the protocol.
Yeah, and in typical Wire style, with clinical precision, they kind of establish a murky answer for the question, with Caroline saying, if he wasn't black, he wouldn't have got shot, and then Freeman defending, saying, the description called for a number 1 male, and number 1 is the police code for black. So it's nice to hear from both sides how it can be interpreted. And just, typical wire, really. They've certainly come a long way since Cheese's dogfight, which knocked down their last bunch of wires, and they've now finally got to a position where they can get up on the wire again. So,
yeah, they have a bit of established information. They must have reams and reams of paper and recordings and all sorts of stuff on similar investigations. So they feel like they have a bit more of a safety net when things do go wrong, which puts the wiretaps and the detail in a better position to bounce back when something happens. Otherwise, it might get a bit frustrating for us as the viewer if we're constantly seeing them get knocked back to square one.
Yeah, exactly. It's very satisfying to see them build up to this position.
Otherwise, it ends up in just the worst game of snakes and ladders, where it's just someone's shooting all the way up to the top and then they come crumbling back down again, and it's too much of an extreme. So it gives us a nice bouncing back point. Let's move on to the next bit.
Sure.
McNulty is restless as he and Greggs wait for the meeting to happen. He tells Greggs about his failed relationship with D'Agostino and how she seemed to question his intelligence. The next day, a more cheerful McNulty reports successfully tailing Tweety Bird to a possible stash house. Other members of the unit are despondent because the Barksdales have ditched their phones after only 30 hours of the wiretap being up. Daniels is appalled at the cost of getting the wiretaps for so little in return. Sidner suggests that they should continue to follow Bernard and Squeak to try and get wiretaps on the next batch of phones. But Greggs worries that there is little point in expending so much effort for phones that are used for such a short time. Daniels asks for a way to get ahead of the curve, and Pullman suggests they could try to pre-wiretap the phones. Freeman and McNulty both have an idea that might solve the problems, supplying the phones directly to Bernard, the Barksdale crew member responsible for purchasing them. Sidner watches the unit's camera on the print shop and notices Stringer worriedly pacing around and smoking. And later the detail log shows Stringer making a call to the Western District.
Yeah.
So sort of continuation of the details work here, and as we were saying before, when they have a bit of a failure, they do end up being able to pick themselves up because they have quite a radical scheme, which through the devil-may-care attitude of Judge Phelan, they're able to push through, as we see later on. Great minds thinking alike with Lester and McNulty.
Or potentially McNulty, desperate to keep up with Freeman, pretends that he has the same idea. But
yeah, that's what I was thinking. There's sort of a possibility that he's maybe just not wanting to make it seem like
he's slower.
He's not on top of things as well.
Because we already know how wounded potentially his ego might be, because Freeman really honestly has been ahead of McNulty on every step, as we mentioned before, in terms of chasing Stringer. And to make it even more embarrassing, he was the one who wasn't even making a big shout about it when the case target was Kintel Williamson. So I think that element may play into it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And does this include the bit about McNulty talking about D'Agostino, is it, to Kima in the car?
Yes. Well, it kind of starts off with them, him sort of venting quite a bit of frustration about not really belonging. And this is quite an important theme in this episode as a whole, as Jimmy kind of feels like he's not really wanted anywhere. He's not particularly wanted in the major case unit by Daniels, who obviously still harbours quite a bit of resentment for him. He's obviously no use at home with Elena. He's not able to convince her, and now D'Agostino has shown that she's seeing right through him as well, and he feels a bit out of place. And similarly, we have Stringer, who we mentioned before, where he's being shut out of everything. He's finding that he doesn't have a place. He's trying to make his own world out of it and just not succeeding. And Bunny as well, who is getting shut out of everything as well. He's tried to make a difference. He's tried to carve a little place for himself and his ideals, and he's been completely shut down. So we kind of have three characters trying to deal with a lack of belonging in their respective areas.
Yeah,
But it's McNulty that really vocalises this in this scene. He really kind of complains about just sticking out like a sore thumb and feeling like a bit of a spare part, whilst in his typical arrogance claiming how smart and brilliant he is, and that he kind of deserves to have some kind of special treatment. That's kind of what he can't quite believe, that he's not being recognised for his brilliance, which is classic McNulty.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's a very good analysis there. I think you've kind of nailed the theme of the episode pretty much there. And yeah, it's good to see McNulty kind of have his rant, and it really feels like he's really been wounded properly, more so than ever before in terms of his ego. And it's the first one who's dismissed his smarter than the rest. Yeah, detective work for stupidity. Like, not even that he's not that smart, he's just stupid for getting involved with something that doesn't relate to climbing the ladder and money and the rest of it. So, looking through me, she looks through me, Kima. Like, these are really strong words, and Kima seems to roll her eyes a bit to this, kind of expecting this to happen. But yeah, his ego is still very much alive. So yeah, it's kind of good to see that. It's certainly a bit more vocal than we're used to seeing from McNulty.
I mean, what he's saying is filled with a lot of difficult contradictions in terms of how we approach the character, because McNulty makes a very good point about how he's being pushed out of all of these places and that he's not able to find that stability, which is obviously hinted at that he might get with Beatty. But at the same time, he's still displaying all of this typical arrogance and short-sightedness of his position in the world. That's you sort of feel sympathy for him, but then also at the same time find it very easy to see why he's in that situation. He is pushing people away to some extent with his righteousness. Yeah.
Although I think he was fairly... When he actually had the dinner with D'Agostino, he was fairly controlled with the way he presented himself.
Yeah. So certainly better than one might expect from when he was, really crashing. But I guess the difference is that he doesn't have as much of a direction, at least when he's in a position where he's doing really bad and trying to crash his car the way that he would exactly like it to, for example. He's not... he may be drinking himself to death or whatnot, but he has a very clear direction downwards or a very clear direction upwards, whereas here he's just kind of floating in the middle, doesn't have much of a direction. He's just expressing himself in the way that he knows how and not really getting anywhere. And he's obviously very frustrated with what happens with D'Agostino. He was trying to be more responsible. And like you say, he was more responsible, and it still didn't get him anywhere.
Yeah, that's partly why I am, to some extent, sympathetic with him here, even though he goes about it in the wrong way. Like, she was, was judged pretty horribly for not having those monetary aspirations at the dinner, or at least that's what we insinuate from the scene. And it was a pretty crushing blow for him. So there's definitely faults on both sides there. And I guess she's very much in the Marla category of I live for my career, really, and whoever I'm going to spend my life with has to be in the same boat.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next bit, because we did have the bit where we have it showing the log that Stringer making a call to the Western District, but we've sort of already covered his actions on that. So, and the bit where we see him pacing and smoking, is tying into our smoking theme with Stringer.
That is true.
So let's move on to the last bit for the major case unit, and we have McNulty and Greggs visiting Bubbles to ask him about Bernard and his girlfriend Squeak. Bubbles recognises Squeak and agrees to talk to her. At the detail office, Freeman discusses using Bubbles to set up an undercover meeting with her. So Daniels and Perlman meet with Phelan again with their new plan, and despite it being a bit legally shaky, he agrees to go ahead with it, encouraged by some flirting by Perlman. The next day, Greggs and McNulty meet with Bubbles and tell him about their plan to sell phones to Squeak. As they talk, McNulty thinks he spots Beatty driving past, and he chases the car but finds that the driver is not Beatty at all. I'd say that's the last section. It's not the last section. There's one more after that one. But yes, we have our dare I say, Bubble and Squeak. I'm not sure if it's meant to be a reference to that at all.
That's not bad. I never thought of that angle.
So yeah, he recognises her. We kind of get that mention from Greggs about, is there anyone on the street that he doesn't know? And it's nice that he says just citizens, basically. He doesn't know any of the normal citizens. He just knows the people involved in the game.
Yeah, it's awesome all the history that he draws on. And also weird how he's so exclusive to Kima McNulty as well. Like there's, I think Freeman says, "Oh, you see, I understood, did he? You see, I knows her." And like we just have to consider that Freeman doesn't have a clue who Bubbles is and has never met him. And that's something that sort of struck me. I was like, oh yeah, of course. Like Bubbles is a very exclusive CI, as CI should be.
He does here.
Yeah.
He does eventually in this episode. So
Does he meet? Oh, of course he does. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
yeah, they work together on the whole plan.
Yeah.
So.
Silly me. So they didn't make much of that meeting, but it was a very cool meeting anyway, which we'll get to, I'm sure. Yeah. So nice that
We have our bit where we see quite the legal mind, as Daniel says, where when they return with Phelan with their new plan,
yeah.
he's very much encouraged by very out and out flirting from Perlman,
Yeah.
which Daniel seems to be quite happy with because it's getting them progress on the case. So I guess he sees it as just a bit of harmless cheating, like you say, with the game. Sometimes you have to cheat.
Definitely.
Just seems to find the whole thing funny, which is endearing for Daniels.
Yeah. It's either jealousy or laughter, really, I guess, isn't it? So he's got the right one, and nice to hear the Stringer call from the perspective of the cops here, because Freeman picks up Stringer's Western call, and they contemplate the idea that he's surrendering, which McNulty says he'll never forgive him for all the work they've done, which is a nice kind of probably slightly tongue-in-cheek comment, but another nice way of conveying that it's all about the satisfaction of the chase and not the ultimate outcome for McNulty here.
And then in our last bit, we have McNulty making a bit of a fool out of himself, leading towards that stability and something responsible that he's now looking for. Thinks he sees Beady, and obviously it's just someone who looks a bit like her. So it's just a nice little moment to see that he really sort of very suddenly lights up when he thinks that it's her, and that sudden crushing realisation that he's just made a bit of a fool of himself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's an odd little scene, and I don't know why fake Beady doesn't at least question these apparent citizens doing some extremely dangerous driving behaviour, or at least ask what the hell they mean by this strange interruption.
Especially when we see they have the shopping cart stuck outside their boot, or the trunk, as the American cousins call it.
Yeah, I guess she's a bit of a bore, or perhaps she only really has jurisdiction over the ports, as those port authority cops maybe do. So perhaps whatever happens on the streets of Baltimore doesn't really cover her, not within her remit, so to speak. So, but yeah,
I guess so.
It's a strange reaction from her anyway. She sort of drove on, looking very disgruntled. Yeah, I think that's pretty much covered it up. Just mentioning in terms of Stringer calling in, I guess it was. Forget how early Stringer calls his hit on Avon, so to speak, as he does now. I guess it's essentially to get him in prison, right? But wouldn't, and so he could get back to running things, but wouldn't then Slim Charles be running things? I guess it would have to be a case of Stringer becoming an independent, or, well, I guess his ultimate goal is to go beyond the game, beyond the co-op, isn't it? So it's only made me think about what his goal is beyond this point, because if he's involved with it, if his name is leaked, he's probably dead. Not that he's going.
Maybe he feels confident enough that he can actually take control.
Yeah,
but it's not entirely certain how exactly he plans to achieve and what he exactly plans to achieve with this. But he knows what the effect is going to be, which is to get Avon in prison, and clearly it's something that he knows he needs or wants to do.
Yep. All right, so
our final section, yeah. So yeah, later, Bubbles stages a reconnection with Squeak and shows her that he's selling cell phones. She arranges a meeting between Bernard and Freeman, who is posing as Bubbles' supplier. Freeman pretends to be a con man named Calvin, and Bernard checks his story by having him prove that he can read the numbers. Freeman takes Bernard and Squeak to a staged cell phone shop, and he explains that he's taking discarded phones and paying to have them reactivated using bogus accounts, and then selling them as new. Massey poses as Freeman's niece and assistant. Bernard is taken in, but insists on doctored receipts as part of the deal.
Yeah, great little sequence here. Fantastic.
Yeah, is there ever another... is there a better example of the cool Lester Smooth routine? I can't think of one off the top of my head other than this scene. Like, he really goes to town with it, with his pipe and Yeah, he's sort of got the whole act going in here. He does a very good job indeed.
Yeah, he really gets involved in his role, doesn't he? It's pretty awesome undercover work, certainly a fresh approach for the unit. And it pays off big time.
It must be a really fun thing to act out as well, just as an actor to approach a scene where you are acting in the scene.
Yeah, like meta acting.
That must be quite a fun way to approach it.
Definitely, yeah. It's a little bit like McNulty's accent back in season 2.
Yeah.
Kind of meta acting going on, which is a bit weird.
I don't think the questionable nature of his accent ever really goes away.
Yeah, that's true. He just kind of lives and breathes it.
It's the uniqueness of the accent.
Yeah, he's got the perfect transatlantic accent. The half-cent. And, yeah, it's not just Freeman, though, wasn't it? It was Caroline gets very involved in her role as well. And it's great how she kind of brings up the whole bingo line.
Yeah.
Makes things...
Which Freeman actually seems a bit surprised at. Obviously, didn't expect her to go quite that far with it. So, selling that role.
Yeah, but it makes sense. Like, if you were a genuine operation, like you probably would be annoyed that you had to stay extra and kind of forge all these receipts. So, it's some very quick thinking on her feet there. And I think both of them went together in the role very well. I don't know what the legality is surrounding them forging receipts, whether they have to go through another bunch of red tape to sort of arrange for that, or whether it's not going to go on the books. But you'd have thought there'd be some fairly intense laws being breached there too, so it's got me wondering.
The whole thing, as Perlman says earlier, there's no precedent for it because it is quite unusual. The point at which they are being sold, they have not been used for criminal activity, and in fact, arguably there's a sort of this backstory of criminality, which is how they're selling them in the first place. So it's a very, very complicated legal thing here. I mean, I'm certainly no lawyer myself, but I think there would be a way of spinning that in the favour of the people they're supposedly trying to catch.
Yeah, definitely. And we see Bernard taking a big risk here, making his life easier, but highly exposing the operation he works for without realising at all. And I guess with this, that the death of the Barksdale is set up.
Yeah, no, this is a big move because it puts the whole thing in jeopardy. It's putting all of the phone calls that they're making through their organisation right into the hands of the Major Case Unit.
Yep, so they can pretty much lock up anyone who is using the phone, which is, well, everyone up to Shamrock, like pretty much one rung below the bosses. And Stringer certainly, he doesn't use burners, but he does use phones that he switches SIM cards for, so even Stringer's not too far off the firing list at this point, considering he was uncatchable only a few episodes ago. So yeah, it's pretty major breakthrough here. Very, very important.
Yeah, so now let's move on to our last 3 sections. These smaller parts, they're all one part each, one for each character that it covers. First one is Omar, who we have a small bit with. So Omar meets with Butchie to discuss the Barksdale organisation's accidental near-shooting of his grandmother, Josephine. Butchie is disgusted that the Sunday truce was broken and tells Omar about the Barksdale's funeral home base. But Omar is outraged that Butchie has kept this information from him until now. But Butchie protests, saying that he was trying to protect him. Omar then begins to stake out the funeral home and sees Stringer leaving. So this is a good scene, actually. This meeting with Butchie, who does it's a really good performance here, and interesting to see that he withholds this information to protect Omar. He knows him well enough to realise that possession of that information is just going to put him in a position where he's going to get all, feeling like a martyr about it, going to just go in and try to get his revenge, and it's going to get him killed and probably not going to gain him much in the process.
Yeah. Yep.
So he's smart enough to withhold that from him until, arguably, if there is a right time, the right time.
Yeah, and he certainly believes that the stuff going on with his grandma on the Sunday certainly warrants letting him find out this information. Like, it's a big enough breach that it's gonna, come back on them and be worthy of letting Omar be exposed. And it was ultimately Stringer that made that call, and now it's coming back on Stringer again. Like, it's just killing him even quicker. So, yeah, it's good to see that. And great hearing Butchie reminisce on the old wars of decades gone by. Like, I think Kenny Bird and Peanut are mentioned as two old school gangsters from the streets. And they were great warriors, but they knew that the good Lord set Sunday aside for going to church. And you really get the sense, as we mentioned before, that Butchie is, more so than perhaps characters like Prop Joe, is the ultimate kind of preserver of the old ways, like the really old traditions and the values of the streets. And it's those really old school connections that's, no surprise that Butchie knows where the Barksdales are holed up, because he has all these links going back years and years for people that really know the streets inside out. So it's a really cool character that we see bits and pieces of, but it's always very interesting.
Yeah, it's a good scene.
Definitely. And he brings up that great metaphor, doesn't he? Chances as slim as a garter snake. The Baltimore fantastic penchant for weird and wonderful metaphors. So
yeah, and then we see Omar actually beginning the stakeout at the funeral home. As mentioned before, kind of continues that cigarette theme, where he presses us out very, very pointedly.
Yeah, definitely a very typical scene for the show, where we just see Omar kind of scoping out the Barksdales in the dark shadows. I'm sure we've seen maybe 3 or 4 of these scenes so far throughout the season. Normally they're there to end the episode as somewhat of a cliffhanger, but I guess we know Omar so well at this point that we understand that he doesn't strike like that. He waits, he scopes before he does anything rash, so we don't have to worry that he's
presented as having a sort of incredible patience and quite willing to sit on particular areas for days, maybe even a week or more, just gathering information, getting a feel for the area and what people do and when, and picking his moment.
Yeah, more so than anyone else, by tenfold perhaps. He can spend days just sitting there until he's convinced.
Which is not like Brother Mouzone, for example, who just seems to lounge around quite a lot and then turn up when necessary.
Yeah, for all
So
Brother...
we see a lot of scenes where he's got sitting around with his magazines, and Omar doesn't do anything like that. He's always working on something, it seems.
Yeah, for all of his reputation, he doesn't seem to put too much effort in, does he? Yeah, I assume we're going to go on to him next, are we?
I was thinking of doing Brother Mouzone last.
Okay, sure.
So the next one will be with Cutty. The deacon visits Cutty at his gym and discusses getting children in to use it. Cutty visits Amsterdam and finds Carver trying to organise a basketball game, so he approaches him and discusses the boxing initiative. Carver refers him to his timeout corner, filled with children who can't play without fighting. Cutty ends up breaking up a fight between Justin and Spider and begins to teach some moves, using it as a selling point for his gym. Justin and his friends visit the gym later on and instantly criticise the state of the equipment and start an impromptu game of football. Cutty cannot control his temper, and when Justin insults his masculinity, he challenges him, but is reminded of the consequences of striking a juvenile. The kids leave the gym, and Cutty discusses his difficulty with the trainer at another, more established gym later on. And he encourages Cutty to remain patient and show the children that he has faith in them by not letting them fail, no matter how hard they try to. So Cutty returns to Amsterdam and talks to Carver, and he tracks down Justin and apologises for his behaviour at the first meeting. Later on, Justin returns to the gym and finds Cutty training another young'un.
Yeah. So this is quite a nice story.
This is our small Cutty story, yeah, it's nice.
He's had a couple of weeks of really, good fortune and going up in the world, and there's no change here. Despite the kind of pretty boisterous, annoying, rude beginnings with the falling apart gym equipment and Justin and Spider, I think, as well, just taking every opportunity to sort of wither someone down and take the piss, it really gets to Cutty.
Yeah, he ends up getting a lesson in teaching, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Which is, to me, is quite reminiscent of Clay Davis' epigraph from Moral Midgetry, where he's talking about crawl, then walk, then run. That's presented to Cutty here in a very different way about, it's not weak, it's the start. That's where you begin.
Yeah, and a much more honest lesson, thankfully, as well.
Yeah, it's less based around fraudulent means of gaining capital.
Yeah.
But it's a nice little story with Cutty here and making a bit of success in the episode and learning and growing, and obviously he's having a bit of success already with his gym, which grows it into quite the hub of activity by the time we reach season 4.
Yeah, gathering the kids right in time for the season. It's nice how we're getting to see this process step by step, and despite it being perhaps a pretty mundane arc at this point, it's fascinating how much light it's spreading on the city and the kids in particular. And last week, Cutty's story fed into the bureaucracy themes quite heavily with Watkins and Marla and getting things done in terms of city permits. And this week, it's laying some foundations for the season 4, as you mentioned, with the culture of the kids. And it's, as you mentioned, Carver is. It's fantastic to see what Colvin's speech has done to him when he's.
Yeah, he's really taking it on board straight away.
Yeah, absolutely, and there seems to be some sort of connection between Cutty and Carver at this point, and I don't think that they ever really become mates, but there's this there's some sort of mutual understanding that they have, and they hinted at a few times throughout the season. So yeah, it's pretty nice. 2 characters that are making big leaps at reform from past lives that were a bit shittier. So.
And contrary to these characters that we have that feel out of place or directionless, we have Cutty, who is very much finding his place.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's a good companion piece in that sense.
And they seem to enable each other as well, Carver and Cutty. Carver, I love how Carver prevents the patrolman from breaking up the kids' fight, so that Cutty has the chance to go in and reach out to the kids himself and promote his gym a little bit better, a little bit more efficiently. So that was a really nice touch. And yeah, just things like that contribute to it. So yeah, and I think Spider's first appearance. He's one of the more.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a very memorable street character. One of the Stanfield dealers, who can be very threatening at points. I know that he has some concerns about Cutty being his father later on in season 4, as we'll get to. But yeah, so it's cool to see that we're gradually being introduced to all these characters that will become important later on.
Oh no, he has appeared before. Spider.
Has he?
He has showed up before. Yeah, he's in episode 4. He's like just one of the. He's just there on the corner when they're like starting up where he has the meeting with the young drug dealers and tries to convince them to go to the free zones, and he's trying to like round them all up. He's there that when they're in the big group there. Obviously, he's not sort of a main character, but he is there. So
yeah, that's cool. He must be the one that called himself Peanut Butter and Jelly or something. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Good point. I noticed that. But it's cool when they show up at the gym, and I mean, it's cool that they even turn up, like perhaps speak to their boredom without anything to do on the streets. But they're looking for somewhere that they can cause a little bit of trouble, and that's what the show really establishes here. And they're ultimately there to stay rude and Cutty to look at the kiddie banter from above as a teacher. It's just sort of very typical schooling environment, really. And it's interesting to see Cutty responding to their banter like a soldier too. He doesn't have that maturity, as you say. We're going to have to go and learn it first from a more experienced teacher before he can shake that mentality.
Yeah, he's still looking to protect his rep to some extent.
Yeah, and there's a really nice scene set up very nicely where there's 2 kids having a really kind of nice fight. Well, not nice fight, but a good boxing match in the foreground, out of focus. Then behind them we have Cutty and the experienced trainer kind of discussing the ins and outs of being a good teacher and how to motivate the kids. Which is
it's nice.
A really sort of meaningful arrangement, I think, there. And the trick is not to let them know that you've caved into their, attempt to get you down. Basically, you have to never give up on them, and it kind of messes with their mind that they can't win, so to speak, and they'll constantly keep seeking that and never gain it. So it's quite a nice lesson to learn.
And then he goes off to be the bigger man, literally or otherwise, to apologise to Justin and try to make reparations. And this seems to have a positive effect, surprisingly.
Yeah, definitely. Very, very mature approach. And it was nice to see Carver actually playing a game of ball with the kids at the same time. It's like these two men are maturing at the same pace.
Yeah.
So, yeah, nice little...
And sort of bonding around sports.
Yeah, definitely. The men. So, yeah, good Cutty story. Very positive, very nice. A bit lighter than we're used to with most arcs, and a good little platform for Carver as well to develop him a bit further.
So let's take a look at the Brother Mouzone section now, our last one. Brother Mouzone returns to Baltimore with his aide, Lamar. First of all, they come across Detective Holly's crime scene, and then Lamar admits he has no idea where they are. Later, they find their way to the site of the demolished towers, which they were once paid to defend. Brother Mouzone then meets with Vincent and gives him a description of Omar. And Vincent tells him that Omar is an independent operator and a homosexual. Brother Mouzone sends Lamar into gay bars looking for Omar, claiming he is the perfect bait for him to notice. During this search, Omar is nowhere to be found, and Lamar is disgusted by having little success, and his anger draws the attention of several bar patrons. Lamar eventually angers a bartender and catches the attention of Omar's boyfriend Dante, who is in the same bar. And Dante approaches Lamar on the street outside of the club with his weapon drawn to ask what he wants, but is subdued by Brother Mouzone, who was lying in wait.
Yeah.
So this is where we hear all about Lamar's visceral homophobia.
Yeah. Such a great way of putting it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Your homophobia is visceral. And then the fact that he doesn't
getting some extra hamming up from Brother Mouzone.
Yeah. You are conflicted. You are the perfect candidate. It's just, I love the fact that Lamar confuses this homophobia for homosexuality as well. Like, he's convinced that Mouzone's sort of putting him into that category. It's just hilarious.
Well, Lamar is already presented as sort of, not the brightest spark.
No, he certainly plays it very well. It's definitely the biggest laugh of the episode there. Yeah.
And it's interesting because this is actually the first bit that we mentioned is actually like in the opening scenes where they come across the crime scene that Holly's at, and they're like, Lamar's like, I don't even know where we are. Baltimore, Maryland. It's sort of, yeah, we get it. Like, we know where we are. You don't need to give us the whole, it's a street and it's dark and there's been a drug murder. It's Baltimore. Like, that's a road very well travelled by this point. And I don't think it's necessary for Brother Mouzone to point that out again, especially being the character that he is. He's so outrageous, like, he's so larger than life, campy, that it's just not necessary for him to point that out again. And then they head off to visit what is essentially, I mean, especially at this point, it's sort of ground zero, if you like, that they visit.
That's true.
Especially seeing as it's like the start of the season as well, where we get our first 9/11 War on Terror analogy. And they return to that site here where the towers used to be, having been away for quite a while, obviously not privy to them having been brought down.
Mm. Yeah.
And
really,
he talks about the slow train coming.
Yeah, which is again a very classically Mouzone ambiguous line that I wouldn't like to even begin to analyse because I don't know what he means by that. But there's obviously train symbolism elsewhere in the show regarding drinking by the tracks. Bunker McNulty's drinking habits. It's the only connection I can make, but I doubt that has anything to do with it. I guess
it's a sense that it's a powerful force that is not going to have its direction changed, but it's creeping up on people. They're not necessarily realising that it's coming.
Yeah.
I guess that's the point that he's making in a general sense.
Yeah, so he's kind of almost outside the show at this point. Perhaps that's almost like a narrator's job to say that for us, but he's the one who's there to, and I guess he can get away with it as well because he's so disconnected from the actual reality of the show that he can kind of make these comments, and he's so ridiculous already that it makes sense that he does. And he also mentions reform as well, which is on its own not a very ambiguous statement, but the way he says it, there's a lot that's inferred by that. Reform, Lamar, reform. So I'm sure he's referring to the fact that most directly the towers haven't been redeveloped. It's still ground zero. Is that an empty promise, or is that whatever? And but equally, he could also refer to, Stringer being cleaned up. That's a form of reform, and all sorts that he's planning to do in Baltimore. So,
don't you feel that with a little bit of tweaking to the script, Brother Mouzone could have been a character that only Omar could see? And that he could be like a figment of Omar's imagination, and that he could just kind of go around and be this really weird, zany character that we assume is just a weird part of this otherwise very realistic universe, but is sort of actually only Omar can see him.
That's so true, because Stringer's death could have remained the same, and it would have been...
it would have been exactly the same. He could have just been get on with it, motherfucker, singular.
Yeah.
And it would have made very little difference because he doesn't show up until the end anyway.
And he never.
And then most of the interactions that Brother has are with Omar.
Yeah.
So Brother Mouzone and Lamar could just be a figment of their imagination, but the whole thing with the gay bar kind of presses it a bit. Although I suppose he could have it Lamar, no, because then Lamar would have to be able to see him as well. I'm making it too complicated now.
It's
a little bit of tweaking. A little bit of tweaking.
Maybe Lamar is another believer in the god of Mouzone, who doesn't really exist, and
it's this strange cult of Brother Mouzone.
His mission from Brother.
Brother does kind of, well, I mean, he's supposed to have this. What's the name of that group, religious political group that's referenced earlier? I can't remember now.
What in this episode?
Yeah, they're like some kind of, aren't they like a Muslim extremist group or something that's hinted at one point with Brother Mouzone?
Oh, the Nation of Islam?
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, that's true, yeah, because it's a very religious foundation for a character, definitely. And
there's a potential kind of cult, religious overtone for it.
That's certainly cool, and as you mentioned with the Mother F line, he never completes the word. So the actual plurality of that is not confirmed. He could just be referring to Omar, so... But yeah, it's an interesting reading. I've never heard of it like that, but it certainly, considering how ridiculous Brother is, I mean, why not go the whole hog and make him a fictional character? It's half feasible.
Is there anything else that happens in there? We have we have a big thing with the gay bar that they enter, and we have the sort of infamous rules reveal, which is never really spoken about by the show. It's never brought up again. It's just this really nonchalant, obviously, in that sense, very Wire-esque reveal of rules in the gay bar, clearly having a good time. The only other mention of it is, I think, later on in, I'm not sure, season 4, season 5, somebody mentions about some writing in the bathroom about rules liking cock or something like that. That's kind of the only other mention of it. But it brings it into perspective when we hear him again later on at Comstat using those homosexual sort of slurs about people being cocksuckers and the like.
Yeah, that's true. And
it's just a really, really interesting decision of the show to just very briefly display him in this scene ambiguously, but at the same time showing something very clear to the audience about this character and then moving on very swiftly.
Yeah, just letting it lie, just letting it sit there. And it does make it quite funny when you reflect back on the things he said and will say in the show, on reflection and all the porno mags that he flicks through in the office, just all that stuff. It just has a totally different vibe to it once you find this information out. And he just looks so chilled out, doesn't he? He looks, all the stress of the job is gone. This is clearly what he enjoys doing. So,
hey, he needs to have a good time as well. We're all going to have our downtime.
There we go. So, great little discovery, and you're right about the season 4. That right at the end of season 4, Landsman walks into the homicide men's, and I think on the sort of hand dryer, it's written "rules is a cocksucker" or whatever, and Landsman has a knowing giggle at the statement. So it's again another very vague allusion to it, and it's never explored beyond that, which is great, to be honest. Do you think it was a good idea for Mouzone to, do a tour of the gay bars in town? It's certainly not a good way to find Omar, and they got very lucky finding Dante. Not that Lamar ever found Dante. Dante found him. But it's not exactly the best strategy. I'm not sure what you would do if you have no means to go on. You've got no bubbles to go and enlist to find him for you. But it was not necessarily the smartest move, and just sort of trolling around all the gay bars.
Well, as we said before, there's that difference between him and Omar, and that he's doesn't really make any surveillance. He doesn't watch and wait in that same way. He's just trying to quickly make his way to his target, and like you say, he's very lucky here to end up with Dante overhearing. Quite convenient for the purposes of the plot.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're not going to try and go for the surveillance angle, then it would be a reasonable starting point.
Yeah, I guess so.
Although it's based mainly on, ignorance to some extent.
Yeah, because Omar would not have
He's a
enough...
gay man, he must go to gay clubs.
Exactly.
It's a kind of, just a sort of wild assumption.
Yeah, it feels like Mouzone would be smarter than that, but, we know that Omar has way too much on his plate to have any downtime like this. So it is a pretty bad move, and, got very lucky. I guess the other aspect of these scenes is Lamar getting all anxious and about being hit on, which leads to some pretty humorous moments when he starts sort of pushing and shoving people, much to the ambivalence of Rules, who just seems to... That's when he's exposed, isn't he? When he's, I think, between the push and the shove. So,
yeah. Seems to look on with amusement.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So, yeah. That was a really cool bunch of scenes there. I appreciated that.
So that's about it for our recap. Is there anything else that you want to mention that maybe you forgot to mention at the time?
No, I think we've said everything we need to say, really.
I did have one small bit that I forgot to mention, just a mention of sound design more than anything. In the scene where we have Cutty with D'Angelo and they're having the meeting with all his mates and talking about strategy and needing, black community leaders and whatnot. When they start talking about the money needed and the fundraising and the £1 million for television advertising, there's all these cash register and cha-ching noises going on in the background, which is a really nice touch. I think it was sort of quite funny in a way. They're talking about this big money and there's all this cha-ching, cha-ching going on in the background. It's pretty on the nose.
That's great. It's so weird. It's very. I didn't notice it. It's very subtle sort of ambient noise, isn't it? In terms of being in a pub.
Go back and watch it again. Seriously, there's loads of it. It's like every second there's this. They're really piling it on.
That makes it sound hilarious. It's great. I'll have to go and check that out.
Yeah, it is. You have to see it again. It's good. So that was just a little bit I forgot to mention earlier. But other than that, I think you're right. I think we've covered it in terms of the recap. I'm sure there's always little bits more that you can add, but we can turn over to our ever appreciated listenership if they want to cut in on anything that we've missed. In the meantime, let's move on to our final sections.
The boys don't want to extend the good shit if it's gonna keep you and your peoples out on them corners banging.
What about the boy? What the fuck he say?
Vincent say Marlo willing to talk, if he can keep his corners.
Now hear me on this string, we ain't no ingrates. We all recognize your contribute to the co-op. But the feeling is this. It ain't right for you to be at the head of our table when you can't call off your dog. Call it a crisis of leadership.
And I guess we'll start with characters. Any characters standing out for you in this particular episode, as busy as it is?
Yeah, I could name everyone, really. Who wasn't so good, that would be a better test. But I think I'll put in as you mentioned before, the three people who are caught between two frames of mind sort of thing. So Colvin, Stringer, McNulty. These are the crux of this episode and much of the season, really. The people that are campaigning for the right thing from some points of view and getting condemned for it. They're getting chewed up by the institution that they're working for. So that they all had great moments in this episode. Really fantastic moments, and were very compelling to watch. I think honourable mentions for Rules, Burrell, Avon and Freeman, who all seem to do things a little bit beyond what we're used to seeing of them. It's kind of showing us new sides to them. Obviously Freeman with his awesome undercover acting skills. Avon just reinforcing how great he is as this kind of almost parody warrior at this point, just really trying to run Avon's nerves down. Burrell obviously in the most compromised we've ever seen him. Political figure. The problem he has compared to the rest of the people in the police department is his job is inherently political, unlike the rest of them. So he has to face up to these big political leanings, and that puts him into a very, very tricky position, which is not necessarily nice to see, but it's certainly interesting. And then Rules, not only him being quick on his game in the Comstat and really kind of analysing the legalisation and kind of finding it hilarious, but also his brief appearance in the gay bar is definitely worth picking up on. So I think those 7, if that's not narrowing it down much, but those 7 certainly stuck out.
Yeah, you won't hear much disagreement from me on that. I was also going to say those 3 characters that are dealing with their position of belonging and direction and trying to push what they think is right. They definitely are standout performances and standout character arcs for much of the series, like you said. And I also was going to throw in a mention for Freeman because I just found his whole act to be really satisfying to watch, and the way he shows off with the numbers, and he really delves into his role there, which is great. It's always nice to see it when they go undercover and play certain characters. I always find that really interesting to watch with the Major Case Unit and the detail. Like earlier on, where they're getting the lessons from Bubbles on how to be a true dope fiend. It's those kind of scenes that I do always remember quite fondly. So but otherwise, as usual, very difficult.
Excellent. Yeah. But by the way, we didn't discuss it. What was your interpretation of what Freeman was doing when he read the numbers? So I'm not sure I've ever worked it out. I'm wondering whether is he reading over Bernard's shoulder as he dials a number? Is he?
I think what he was doing was sort of pretending to talk on the phone whilst being able to read the number that he was dialing, I think, or something like that. I think he was looking at the number that he was dialing.
That's really weird.
But yeah, I don't know. It is not exactly clear. Maybe it's obvious to somebody who's sort of more aware of that kind of gaming. If anyone wants to chip in, send us an email, get in touch to illuminate exactly what it is that he's doing there.
So I don't know how
I get the impression that it's quite impressive.
Yeah,
but I don't know exactly what it is.
I don't know how that would prove to Bernard that he's a good businessman as far as selling phones goes. But I mean, when the first time I watched it, I assumed that he. Bernard dialed his phone, Freeman's apparently kind of crook phone, and then Freeman read Bernard's number off the phone, proving that it was a legitimate phone or something like that. That was certainly my take on it. But it's kind of odd. I'm not quite sure exactly what is going on there. So definitely please chime in, guys, if you have light to shed on that matter.
Yeah, by all means. Enlighten us.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at any scenes in particular that stood out for you in this episode. Anything in particular you wanted to mention, or is it all a bit of a blur given how many scenes we have?
I guess probably just mirroring the scenes with the characters. Despite not really understanding what was going on, the Freeman and Massey undercover gig was really fun. All 3 of the gay bar trips were quite fun as well. Avon versus Stringer, kind of the next round after their original D'Angelo battle. And obviously the final round is coming next episode when they're up on the balcony. That's really, really good scene. And I think McNulty really letting off steam about being in a new place, having no direction beyond the case, and with the frustration with D'Agostino is really good as well. So that's what I'd kind of go for as mine.
Yeah, I was going to mention the meeting with Avon and Stringer and kind of those really final tensions coming between them and how shut out Stringer seemed. Thought it was all really nicely put together. It's also good to see Stringer being under a lot of pressure in that position, and as we mentioned before, we're used to him seeing him in such a position of power that now he's so vulnerable and having to make these decisions just to survive. So that was very satisfying. I also really liked the scene with Butchie and Omar. I thought that was quite an endearing moment for what was otherwise a very short scene.
That is
and
true.
You really get, it comes through, as you mentioned with Butchie, how he really embodies those old street values, and even more so than Prop Joe, like you say. He really comes through with his values there, and it's quite an incredible character that I feel like we could have seen a lot more of in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, very good choice. What was your take on the title of this episode? So, Reformation or Reformation, however you want to pronounce it.
Yes, the Reformation. I mean, it brings us back to episode 1 in some ways, with Royce's speech about reform and change and how it's not a show. He's doing it for real. Like, it brings us back to those ideas. And obviously, there's a lot of reform going on in this show as a whole. It's an ongoing theme. But we have a lot of more individual characters undergoing reform in this episode. We have Cutty really pushing through and making his gym a success and realising what he needs to do to change his mentality. After realising what it is that he's not capable of, he now needs to realise what he is capable of instead, which is a nice little track.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Colvin is trying to obviously reform what's going on with the drug war. He has quite a long speech about what's going on there, his plan of reformation. Brother Mouzone points to it directly, talking about reform and how the towers coming down somehow represent the reform that the city is supposedly trying to undergo, but I don't know if he treats it with much seriousness. McNulty trying to undergo his own personal reform, trying to find some direction, although not having too much success thus far. And just an overall sense of, there's a lot of mentions in this episode of elections coming and voters and how we're going to approach the next election period, and that's a sense of there is going to be some kind of upcoming reform that people are steeling themselves for. They're making plans, they're deciding who's their friend and who are their enemies, and that casts a shadow over what's to come in season 4.
Yeah, excellent. Great reading of it. It's a little bit different for me. I think the whole season was really about reform. That's kind of what the theme is, alongside the politics. And this is the peak of that reform. If anything, it's perhaps an ironic title because this is the end of the road as far as reform goes. It's all downhill from here. The catastrophes that will put an end to stuff are about to engage in the next episode. Amsterdam's going to go. Stringer's going to go, who was representing the legitimization of the drug game. The empty promises as kind of evoked by that ground zero, as you mentioned, obviously not really the reform that is evoked by the title there that we're seeing. Although I do totally agree that the title makes sense in the sense of Cutty, who is just getting going with his reform finally. And I like it how you put it as he's found out what he can't do, but he's now discovering what he is able to do. So I think overall, perhaps an odd, slightly ironic title, but there are real actual reform going on there as well. So yeah.
And then our epigraph from Prop Joe, saying, "Call it a crisis of leadership, or crises of leadership," as he says.
Yeah, he says it in plural, doesn't he? Strangely. But yeah, kind of a direct link to the Barksdales, but very applicable to the stuff with the Western and Amsterdam and Comstat. Not the best of the epigraphs, but it's nice that Prop Joe finally gets his moment to shine. Perhaps stirring up a hornet's nest would have been a slightly better one, I'm not sure. Maybe Massey's line about being late for bingo would have been pretty decent as well. But, yeah.
Yeah, it's just pointing to a lot of things going on with various people in positions of power and responsibility in this episode. You know, we got Burrell dealing with his position of leadership and the crisis going on there with who's going to take the fall for what, when, how. Cutty's got to learn how to be a bit more of a leader and his crisis of leadership in the gym.
Yeah, that's very true.
Carcetti dealing with what it is he's got to sacrifice and make do with what he's got to deal with if he wants to have his leadership. Avon, you know, he's having his he's not really so much of a crisis of leadership per se, but he's having to take the helm somewhat unwisely whilst refusing to back off from this conflict with Marlowe. So yeah, there's just a lot of people in positions of power and responsibility, and as Freeman says, heavy is the head that wears the crown, and that's an ongoing theme in this episode. So
yeah,
it's not a particularly memorable epigraph, as you say, but it just ties into what's going on in the episode.
Yeah, very good actually. Lots of interpretations.
Which I suppose the epigraph is supposed to do. So
yeah, very efficient.
It's effective.
Yeah.
Right, well, I guess that is it for Season 3, Episode 10.
Damn. 2 left.
2 to go.
2 left this season.
Crazy.
Craziness.
It's come to that already. It'd be starting Season 4 before you know it.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I think it's actually going to be about a year into our podcasting when we're going to start Season 4. So, the best season of the show as well. But we've got a couple more episodes to go yet, so let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, middle ground next.
And despite trying to cut things down, we have still clocked in at over 2 hours, so hopefully you guys don't mind too much these excessive lengths. I think we're both fairly on the idea that an hour and a half, maybe an hour 45 is a really good podcast length. And much beyond that, it becomes a little bit of a slog perhaps, but please do let us know if you have any suggestions with the timing or anything like that. But
yeah, by all means, shoot us an email, caughtonthewire@gmail.com. I'm sure you know the drill by now. Check out the website, caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. All of the episodes, including Season 1 and 2, are available on there, as we mentioned before. There's a contact form. We like to stick up various blog posts every now and again. Recently posted the trailer for the new David Simon show, Show Me a Hero, with Oscar Isaac.
yeah,
So check that out. It looks really, really good.
It looks great.
Yeah, can't wait for that. But otherwise, we shall see you next week for Episode 11, Middle Ground. Until then.
See you then.
What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore?